Hi there. Welcome to the Small Business Coffee Break, the video series where we take a few minutes to work on your business, not just in it. Today we talk about what size business you have to be in order to work with a professional employer organization, with Stephanie Fortune of Fortune Business Consulting. Stephanie has over 8 years of experience as a PEO consultant and started her own firm in 2018. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get into it. So we've talked about the value that it brings to a small business or any business. We've talked about the outsourcing. We've talked about independent contractors and the value of maybe having a corporate mindset as far as how employer-employee relationships should work. Sure. That being said, is there a certain size a business has to be to qualify for a professional employer organization?
So there's no size per se. I literally have clients that is a one-man show or one-woman show. Well, actually, all of them are one-man shows. But I have clients that up in the hundreds in terms of employee count. So there's no real quote-unquote minimum or size per se, right? I think there's usually a point in terms of like the business life cycle when businesses might see more value in maybe outsourcing certain functions or even having the need for certain functions, right? So if it's 1 or 2 persons, they're likely processing payroll internally, maybe using something like QuickBooks for the payroll and accounting services. So they might not necessarily need it. Even if we look at workers' compensation in the state of Florida, they're not at that 4-person mark, so again, may not necessarily need it or be obligated to have it.
Obligated to have it.
Obligated to have it.
I appreciate the clarification there.
Yeah. And so again, at that point, they may not necessarily see it as something that would be needed at that point or be valuable. And so they may not necessarily make that decision to actually inquire or seek value in a PEO. However, there's a range. So if you look at the average size organization, it's about 10 or so employees, right? Okay. And for PEOs, the average client company size is around 16 employees. Okay. But you'll typically see a range between like maybe 2 or 3 to about the 20 mark on average. Okay. So again, the value proposition tends to kind of be more apparent when you get to that size. So maybe now you're hiring more aggressively. Maybe now you're offering services that maybe more in different states. Maybe there's more exposure, so to speak, with regards to, again, looking at workers' compensation. So they want to make sure that they're insulating themselves from that risk, in addition to providing proper coverage in the event that something does happen during the course of work for their employees. Mm-hmm. Again, in terms of hiring, firing, training, recruiting, so on and so forth, they want to make sure that they have the expertise that best adds value to the organization as well as their employee base. So I think that it's twofold. So it's one, what typically is the average when looking at a PEO, mm-hmm. in addition to the value proposition that exists for businesses at certain points in their business life cycle.
That's interesting. And as you were describing it there, I was thinking of different ideas or different scenarios that might exist. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the idea of this is we're living in a startup mm-hmm. world right now, right? And there are so many and because there's so much capital out there. For these things to be able to be. And interesting thought for me was, it's like, well, if I'm starting something new, mm-hmm. something that is going to be small up front, but will need to scale very, very quickly. And you don't want to be really worried about having to change benefits, having to worry about certain payroll things, or when we reach a certain time when we have to go from weekly to bi-weekly, or all those little things that small businesses, when they grow very slowly, kind of naturally you get to those points. But if you were going to ramp up quickly, even if you were going to be small for a year or two, it might be a very good idea to consider a PEO, because when you want to scale, it seems that some of the way that you're describing it, without having an internal HR person, an internal accountant, or so on and so forth, you might be able to reach that level very, very quickly, and then obviously reassess whenever that time came. But so even if you're a very small business, there could be opportunities where you're like, hey, this makes sense, and I guess there's got to be a cost-benefit analysis, Absolutely. Right? At the end of the day, all small business owners are always trying to pinch pennies. Mm-hmm. It's my grandfather used to say, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. And I've always taken that to heart. And with running a small business, that's even more important. Let's keep the conversation going. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Stephanie, ask it in the comments, or her contact information is in the description. If you have any questions you'd like me to ask Stephanie or any other professional in their field, my contact information is also in the description, and I'm always available through a direct message. See you next week for another cup of coffee and more questions answered.